Ambassador Sarah Chen stared at the security officer's four arms, all crossed in different displays of disapproval. The crystalline being's translucent body pulsed with warning colors, mostly deep purples and reds that reflected off the pristine white walls of Nexus 7's diplomatic quarter. Ambassador, the regulations regarding primitive artifacts in diplomatic zones are quite clear. Security Chief Val Zen's voice chimed like breaking glass. Section 47B specifically prohibits non-technological entertainment devices. Sarah glanced down at the antique wooden chess set on her desk, a gift from her grandfather that had survived Earth's first interstellar war. Its hand-carved pieces, worn smooth by generations of players, seemed absurdly out of place among the station's sleek surfaces and hovering holoscreens. "With respect, Chief," she said, choosing her words carefully, "this isn't just a primitive artifact. It's a demonstration of human culture and cognitive development." She picked up the Black Queen, its ebony surface catching the artificial light. "Would you like to learn how it works?" The security chief's crystalline form flickered with uncertainty. In the 3 weeks since humanity had been granted their embassy space on Nexus 7, Sarah had learned that the Crystalline Confederation valued protocol above almost everything else. But they also prized knowledge, and their curiosity often wrestled with their rigid adherence to rules. Demonstrating the artifact would compound the infraction. Val Zen chimed, but Sarah noticed a subtle shift in their color pattern, a hint of curious blue rippling through the angry purple. A small crowd of alien diplomats had begun to gather outside her office's transparent walls. Sarah spotted at least 3 species she recognized. The towering tentacled Orcs, a cluster of bioluminescent aetheri floating near the ceiling, and a single Valdaxian whose cybernetic enhancements glinted in the light. "Tell you what," Sarah said, setting up the board with practiced efficiency, "let's make this interesting. 1 game. If you win, I'll not only remove all board games from the embassy, but I'll accept relocation to the outer rings." The threat of exile to the station's less prestigious sectors hung in the air. Val Zen's surface rippled with surprise. "And if you win, then board games get officially recognized as acceptable cultural artifacts in diplomatic zones." Sarah smiled, knowing she was taking a massive risk. The outer rings were where failed embassies went to die, forgotten by the galactic community. But sometimes the biggest victories required the biggest gambles. The security chief's colors swirled in rapid succession: red, purple, blue, and finally settling on a thoughtful green. "You would risk your embassy's position over this primitive entertainment device. That's how important it is to us." Sarah gestured to the gathering crowd. "And look, we're already promoting interspecies dialogue." Indeed, the various diplomatic representatives had begun discussing among themselves, their translators working overtime to keep up with the excited speculation. Several holographic recording devices had materialized, documenting what was quickly becoming a minor diplomatic incident. Val Zen's form crystallized into a decision pattern. "Very well, Ambassador. Explain the rules of this challenge." For the next 10 minutes, Sarah outlined the basics of chess, noting with interest how quickly the security chief grasped the underlying concepts. The gathering crowd had grown larger, and she could hear betting pools being established in at least 3 different currencies. "Fascinating," Val Zen chimed as Sarah explained castling. "The pieces' movements reflect military formations, yet they're bound by arbitrary limitations. Most inefficient." "Sometimes," Sarah replied, moving her first pawn. "Limitations breed creativity." The game that followed would later be described in at least 12 different diplomatic reports, each species interpreting it through their own cultural lens. The Orcs saw it as a ritual combat. The aetheri wrote poems about the emotional resonance of each move. The Valdaxians produced a 147-page analysis of the tactical implications. What they all agreed on was that something significant changed on Nexus 7 that day. As Val Zen's crystalline appendage hovered over their last remaining rook, the security chief's colors had shifted to a deep blue of concentration. The crowd had grown so large that station maintenance had to adjust the corridor's atmospheric settings. Sarah held her breath. She had a trap set up, but it required the security chief to make exactly the wrong move, or perhaps exactly the right one, depending on your perspective. Val Zen moved the rook. 4 moves later, Sarah smiled. Checkmate. The security chief's form pulsed with a rainbow of colors before settling into a peculiar shade of pink that Sarah had never seen before. Remarkable, they chimed. The game's complexity exceeds its apparent simplicity. They extended all 4 arms in a gesture of formal acknowledgement. The diplomatic course will receive updated regulations regarding human cultural artifacts within the hour. As the crowd erupted in a cacophony of reactions, some celebrating their betting victories, others demanding rematches on behalf of their species, Sarah carefully packed away the chess pieces. Her grandfather had always told her that sometimes the best moves in life, as in chess, were the ones that seemed the riskiest. She didn't realize then that this was just the opening move in a much larger game. General Zix's cybernetic eye whirred as it focused on the chess piece, its targeting systems analyzing the object from 12 different spectral frequencies. The Valdaxian military leader's chrome-plated exoskeleton hummed with barely contained power as he towered over Sarah's desk. 3 of my best strategic analysts, he said, his synthetic voice modulator giving each word a metallic edge, have failed to report for duty for 6 consecutive cycles. Instead, they were found here, moving carved objects across a geometric plane. He set the piece down with mechanical precision. Explain. Sarah maintained her diplomatic smile, though she felt a bead of sweat roll down her neck. The Valdaxians were the galaxy's foremost military power, their strategic capabilities enhanced by neural interfaces that could process millions of tactical scenarios per second. Having their general show up unannounced was like having a battleship park in your front yard. They'd been participating in cultural exchange, General. Chess is a traditional human game of strategy. Strategy. His cybernetic eye pulsed red. Your species only achieved interstellar travel 3 decades ago. What could you possibly teach us about strategy? Before Sarah could respond, one of the missing analysts burst into her office. Lieutenant Kaleth's usually pristine chrome plating was dulled with lack of maintenance, and her neural interface lights blinked in erratic patterns. General, I've discovered something remarkable. Kaleth's words tumbled out in excited bursts. The game, it's not about processing power. It's about intuition, pattern recognition, creative thinking. Our combat simulations have improved by 47% since we started playing. Zix's organic eye narrowed. Impossible. I can prove it, Sarah interjected, seeing an opportunity. A public match. You versus me. Use your neural enhancements. Run every tactical simulation you want. If I win, you officially endorse chess as a training tool for your military. And if I win, then I personally delete every chess program from your analyst's neural interfaces. The general's exoskeleton whirred as he considered the challenge. Around them, the embassy's atmospheric regulators hummed softly, compensating for the heat generated by his combat-grade cybernetics. Very well, he said finally, but we do this properly. Main diplomatic chamber. Full neural interface access. I want the entire station to witness this. Lesson. 3 hours later, Sarah found herself seated at a floating platform in Nexus 7's central diplomatic chamber. The vast circular room, usually reserved for major treaty signings, was packed with representatives from every species on the station. The chessboard between her and Zixith was being scanned and projected as a massive hologram above them, allowing the audience to follow every move. Are you sure about this? Val Zen chimed quietly from their position as official observer. The security chief's crystalline form rippled with concern. The general's neural interface is military grade. He can calculate every possible move until the heat death of the universe. Sarah watched as Zixth connected additional processing nodes to his neural interface. Sometimes the best calculator isn't the best player. The match began. For the first 20 moves, it seemed like Sarah was being systematically dismantled. Zix's moves came in perfect, machine-precise intervals, each one following optimal game theory. The holographic display above them showed his predicted win probability climbing steadily, 64%, 73%, 89%. But Sarah had spent her life playing against both humans and computers. She knew that perfect calculation wasn't everything. On move 23, she sacrificed her queen. The audience gasped. Zix's neural interface lights flickered in confusion. The move was, by every tactical calculation, suicidal. It violated dozens of strategic principles. The general's win probability display jumped to 97%. Yet 6 moves later, Zix's organic eye widened as he saw it. Sarah had woven a web of seemingly suboptimal moves that, together, created a pattern his tactical simulations had dismissed as statistically insignificant. His king was trapped not by force, but by the turnabout of his own perfect positioning. "Impossible," he whispered, his voice modulator glitching with surprise. "That's the thing about humans," Sarah said, moving her knight to its final position. "We don't always play to win. Sometimes we play to learn." The holographic display exploded with notifications as every possible calculation led to the same conclusion. Checkmate in 3 moves, no matter what the general did. Zix sat back, his exoskeleton powering down from combat readiness. For a long moment, the chamber was silent except for the soft hum of machinery. Then the general did something that made several of his analysts' neural interfaces crash. He laughed. "Remarkable," he said, standing to his full height. "Your primitive game has taught me something our advanced simulations could not. Sometimes, the most efficient path is not the most effective one." As the chamber erupted in excited discussion, Sarah began resetting the pieces. She had a feeling the Valdaxian Military Academy was about to add some very old Earth games to its very modern curriculum. In the back of the chamber, unnoticed by most, a figure watched the proceedings with calculating eyes, making notes on an ancient paper notebook. The real game, they knew, was just beginning. The Prel hive mind representatives undulated in perfect synchronization as they studied the colorful board laid out before them. Their translucent, jellyfish-like bodies cast shifting shadows across Pandemic's global map, tentacles moving in unconscious harmony as they processed this new concept. You intentionally design games where players must cooperate. The question emerged from their collective consciousness, voiced simultaneously through 3 bodies. Without neural linkage. Sarah nodded, watching as their synchronized movements briefly fell out of rhythm. A sign of intense cognitive dissonance among their species. Not only cooperate but overcome challenges that would be impossible to face alone. The lead Prel, distinguished by its slightly more iridescent glow, reached out with a tentacle to move a piece. The other 2 flinched, their natural synchronization disrupted by individual curiosity. For a species that had evolved to think and move as one, the idea of voluntary, unlinked cooperation was revolutionary. "Fascinating," they chorused, though their harmonics were noticeably discordant. "But how do you prevent chaos without the guiding force of the collective?" Before Sarah could answer, an urgent message flashed across her neural interface. Station security was requesting her immediate presence in the commercial district. She looked apologetically at the Prel. "If you'll excuse me, we can continue this discussion later. Please, feel free to keep exploring the game." The corridors of Nexus 7's commercial district were in chaos. Aliens of various species crowded around storefronts, their translator matrices struggling to keep up with the overlapping arguments. At the center of the commotion, Val Zen's crystalline form pulsed with emergency colors. "Ambassador," the security chief chimed grimly, "we have a situation." They led Sarah to a merchant's stall where counterfeit board games were spread across the counter. The copies were clearly homemade, some carved from exotic materials, others crafted from salvaged starship panels. But it was the modified Monopoly set that caught her attention. "Is that crystalline currency?" Sarah picked up one of the game pieces, recognizing the rare mineral used as currency in the Outer Rim systems. 17 different species have been trading with real currency, using modified rules they apparently extrapolated from a smuggled rulebook. Val Zen's form flickered with distress. The Outer Rim exchange has crashed. 3 systems are experiencing economic upheaval. Sarah's heart sank as she examined the board. Someone had modified the properties to represent actual trading posts and space stations. The rules had been altered to incorporate real estate laws from various species. It was elegant, clever, and absolutely devastating to the complex economic ecosystems of developing systems. That's not the worst of it, Val Zen continued. The Prel. They're experiencing some kind of collective crisis. Sarah rushed back to the diplomatic quarter, her mind racing. When she reached the human embassy's game room, she found the 3 Prel representatives engaged in something she'd never seen before. They were moving independently, each taking different actions in the pandemic game. Amazing, one whispered, its voice distinct from the others for the first time in recorded history. We are disagreeing, yet succeeding. The infection spreads too quickly here, another argued, pointing to Asia. We must prioritize containment. But the research stations, the third countered, its tentacles gesturing enthusiastically. If we coordinate our roles properly. Sarah watched in astonishment as the 3 beings, members of a species famous for their unbreakable neural synchronization, debated strategy. They were learning to think independently while still working toward a common goal, something their species had believed impossible. Her neural interface pinged again. The Arctians were reporting unprecedented behavior in their young after exposure to Jenga. The Valdaxian military was requesting immediate access to something called Battleship. And someone had introduced cards against humanity to the empathic Aetheri, causing a diplomatic incident that threatened 3 centuries of peace treaties. Ambassador, Val Zen chimed from behind her, their crystalline form now pulsing with worried amberlight. The Galactic Council is convening an emergency session. They're calling it the Cardboard Crisis. Sarah watched as the Prel representatives successfully conquered their first virtual pandemic, their movements now a fascinating blend of individual action and group coordination. Something fundamental was changing in the galaxy's social order, all because of games humans had invented to pass the time. Her interface pinged one final time. A message from an anonymous source. Phase 1 proceeding as planned. Prepare for cultural acceleration. Sarah's blood ran cold as she recognized the writing style. It couldn't be him. He'd been banned from diplomatic service years ago. But as she looked around at the chaos unfolding across the station, the economic crashes, the spiritual crisis, the diplomatic upheavals, she realized that someone had been orchestrating this all along. The games were just the opening move in a much larger plan to force the galaxy to evolve. And now she had to decide. Stop it, or let it play out. The first intergalactic board game tournament transformed Nexus 7's grand ceremonial hall into a bizarre mix of high-tech sophistication and ancient gaming traditions. Holographic displays hovered above dozens of tables, each showing real-time game states to the thousands of spectators. The air hummed with the sound of universal translators, struggling to keep up with excited discussions in hundreds of languages. Sarah walked between the tables, trying to hide her growing concern. Something felt off about the tournament structure, but she couldn't quite place it. At one table, a group of Arctians used their tentacles to delicately stack Jenga blocks, their usual fluid movements replaced by almost surgical precision. At another, Valdaxian military officers engaged in an intense game of diplomacy, their neural interfaces glowing as they processed potential alliances and betrayals. Then she saw it, Table 13. The mysterious competitor who had been suggesting increasingly controversial game pairings was about to introduce the empathic Aetheri to Betrayal at House on the Hill. Stop the game, Sarah called out, but it was too late. The Aetheri, floating orbs of pure energy contained within crystalline shells, had already begun to read the game's rules. Their shells, usually glowing with soft, harmonious colors reflecting their emotional states, began to flicker erratically. "This concept, bluffing," one of the Aetheri whispered, its voice sending ripples through the station's atmosphere. "It suggests intentionally projecting false emotions." Sarah reached for her neural interface to call security, but the Aetheri's reaction was faster than she expected. Their crystalline shells began to resonate at increasing frequencies as they grappled with the concept. How can beings choose to emit incorrect emotional data? Another Aetheri pulsed with distress. "It violates the fundamental laws of empathic communication." The tournament hall's lights flickered as the Aetheri's distress began affecting the station's power grid. Their species' ability to manipulate energy fields through emotional states was usually kept in careful check, but this revelation was pushing them to their limits. Ambassador Chen. Val Zen's crystalline form rushed toward her, pulsing with urgent colors. "The Aetheri's emotional discharge is affecting critical systems. 3 decks have lost artificial gravity, and the atmospheric processors are becoming unstable." Sarah looked around desperately for the mysterious competitor who had suggested this pairing, catching a glimpse of a familiar silhouette slipping through a service door. The profile triggered a memory, one from her early diplomatic training days. "Lock down all non-essential systems," she ordered, then turned to the Aetheri. "Please, let me explain something about human communication." The floating beings turned their attention to her, their shells still crackling with energy. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing she had to handle this carefully. In human culture, we have something called playing pretend. Even as children, we learn to temporarily assume roles different from our true selves. It's not about deception. It's about understanding different perspectives. The Aetheri's vibrations shifted slightly, curiosity tempering their distress. Sarah pressed on, pulling out her personal deck of cards. "Here, let me show you a simpler game first. It's called poker, and yes, it involves bluffing. But watch closely. The bluff isn't about lying. It's about telling a story." For the next 20 minutes, as station engineers worked frantically to stabilize affected systems, Sarah demonstrated a basic poker game. She explained how a good bluff was less about deception and more about weaving a compelling narrative through actions. "You see," she said, laying down her cards, "we're not hiding our true emotions. We're exploring different facets of ourselves, like how your species modulates energy frequencies to communicate different concepts." The Aetheri's shells gradually stabilized, their colors shifting to a deep, contemplative blue. "So, this bluffing is not about false emotional data, but about creative emotional expression." "Exactly." Sarah smiled, relieved to see the power fluctuations normalizing. "It's a way to understand ourselves and others better." As the tournament resumed under careful supervision, Sarah excused herself and hurried toward the service corridor, where she'd seen the mysterious figure. The door's control panel showed recent tampering, a signature style she recognized from years ago. "Oh no," she whispered, finding a handwritten note scratched into the wall. "Some games need to break the players before they can be rebuilt. Remember Copenhagen." Copenhagen, the diplomatic crisis that had ended Marcus Chen's career and nearly started an interstellar war. Her predecessor, her mentor, her father. Back in the tournament hall, a new game was being set up at table 13. The box read Risk, Galactic Edition, and the designated players were representatives from the notoriously aggressive Meridian Empire. Sarah's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about games anymore. Someone was systematically pushing each species to their cultural breaking point, and she was beginning to understand why. Sarah's footsteps echoed through Nexus 7's maintenance tunnels as she followed the trail of encoded messages her father had left. Each one was written in their old family cipher, strategic notation from chess games they'd played during her childhood. The same cipher that had helped her crack his schemes in Copenhagen 5 years ago. "Your move, little queen," read the latest message, scratched into a maintenance panel. The coordinates beneath pointed to Cargo Bay 7, where diplomatic shipments were processed. Her neural interface pinged with urgent updates. The Meridian delegation had already received their diplomatic package, which would certainly contain a modified version of Risk. The same game that had triggered the Copenhagen crisis when her father introduced it to the Thoraxians, leading to their civil war. Security chief, she sub-vocalized through her neural link. I need a full lockdown on Cargo Bay 7. Impossible. Val Zen's crystalline tones chimed back. Ambassador Chen. Marcus Chen has diplomatic credentials. Older ones, but still valid. He's already inside. Of course he was. He'd planned this all along from the first chess game that started the board game craze. Every cultural crisis, every diplomatic incident had been carefully orchestrated. Sarah had been so focused on damage control, she'd missed the larger pattern until now. The cargo bay doors slid open with a hydraulic hiss. The vast chamber was dimly lit, containers from 100 worlds stacked in neat rows. In the center, a single light illuminated a familiar figure seated at a small table, a game of Risk set up before him. Hello, Sarah, Marcus Chen said without looking up. He was older than she remembered, his hair grayer, but his hands still moved chess pieces with the same precise efficiency he taught her. Care to join the endgame? This has to stop, Sarah said, approaching cautiously. The Meridians aren't like the Thoraxians. If they interpret Risk as a real military simulation, they already have. Her father finally looked up, his eyes sharp behind old-fashioned glasses. Their tactical analysts are probably studying it right now, discovering the fatal flaw I built into the rules. The same flaw that made the Thoraxians realize their military doctrine was fundamentally flawed. Sarah's mind raced. The Thoraxian civil war had eventually led to reforms, transforming their society from a military dictatorship to a constitutional republic. But the cost. How many died in Copenhagen, Dad? How many will die this time? Sometimes the board needs to be cleared for a new game to begin. He gestured to the Risk board. The Meridians are the last major power still clinging to pure military doctrine. Once they see the fundamental flaws in their strategy, flaws that even a simple board game can expose, they'll be ready to evolve. Or they'll start a war that will tear the sector apart. Sarah moved closer, recognizing the position of the pieces. It wasn't Risk he was playing. It was their last chess game, the one from the day he'd been arrested. You taught me that games are about bringing people together, not breaking them apart. I taught you to see the bigger picture. Marcus stood, his diplomatic robes rustling. Every piece sacrificed for a greater victory. That's what you never understood in Copenhagen. Sometimes. The Queen's sacrifice is a trap, Sarah interrupted, finally seeing the full pattern. That's what this whole thing has been, hasn't it? From the first chess game in the embassy. You knew I'd defend board games, knew it would spread through the station. You've been playing a game with the entire galaxy as your board. A small smile crossed her father's face. The student becomes the master, but you're too late. The Meridians have already discovered the modified rules. Sarah pulled out her neural interface display, showing the diplomatic feed. Check. Marcus's eyes widened as he read the screen. The Meridian delegation wasn't studying military applications. They were hosting a tournament in their embassy. Their analytical minds, famous for seeing only military applications, had found something else in the game. Impossible, he whispered. I changed the rules before the package was delivered, Sarah explained. Added cooperative elements from Pandemic, strategy aspects from chess. The Meridians aren't seeing flaws in their doctrine. They're discovering new ways to think about conflict resolution. She moved closer to the table, reached out, and toppled her father's king. The game was never about breaking them, Dad. It was about teaching them to play. The cargo bay doors hissed open again as security forces poured in, led by Val Zen's crystalline form. Marcus Chen looked at the approaching officers, then back at his daughter. You've changed the game, he said softly. I learned from the best. Sarah stepped back as security surrounded them. Sometimes the best moves aren't the ones that capture the most pieces. As they led her father away, Sarah's neural interface lit up with new alerts. The Meridian tournament was spreading to other embassies. The Prel were teaching the Ethery about cooperative gameplay. The Valdaxians were organizing an interspecies chess league. The game hadn't ended. It had only evolved. Walking back through Nexus 7's corridors, Sarah passed the diplomatic lounge where she'd first set up that old chessboard. A group of aliens from 6 different species sat there now, hunched over a complex game of their own invention, one that combined elements from a dozen human board games. They were learning, growing, changing, not through conflict, but through play. Sometimes, she realized, the best victory was teaching others how to win their own games. The Meridian Embassy's central chamber had been transformed into something that defied the laws of physics. Holographic game pieces hung in impossible configurations, their quantum states fluctuating between different rule sets. The massive game board itself seemed to fold through dimensions that shouldn't exist, its pieces moving through both space and possibility. They've merged the strategic elements of chess, the probability mechanics of dice games, and the territorial control of Risk. Val Zen's crystalline form pulsed with worried colors as they analyzed the readings. But they're using their quantum manipulation technology to make the rules literal. Sarah watched as a Meridian game piece phased through multiple states of existence simultaneously. They're not just playing the game, they're making it real. The Meridians, in their enthusiasm to create their own board game, had done something unprecedented. They'd taken the conceptual rules of human games and implemented them using their advanced quantum technology. Each move literally altered the fabric of local spacetime, creating pocket universes where game rules became physical laws. Ambassador, a Meridian technician, approached, their crystalline exoskeleton glowing with excitement. We've successfully integrated the probability matrices from your dice concept with our quantum field generators. Would you like to observe a test? Before Sarah could respond, one of the game pieces suddenly expanded, its quantum state cascading through multiple probability waves. The station's artificial gravity, cubed as space itself, tried to accommodate the impossible mathematics of a 20-sided die operating at a quantum level. Shut it down, Sarah ordered, her neural interface screaming with warnings. The game is creating quantum instabilities. If one of those probability cascades breaks containment. But we're so close. The technician's enthusiasm hadn't dimmed. We've almost perfected the chance cards. Watch. The technician activated another piece. This time, the quantum fluctuation was visible to the naked eye, a rippling distortion in spacetime that briefly made Sarah see every possible outcome of her next movement simultaneously. Her neural interface crashed, overwhelmed by the quantum data surge. Val Zen, she managed through the disorientation. How long until total containment failure? The security chief's crystalline form calculated rapidly. At current progression, 17 minutes. The quantum instabilities are growing exponentially. Sarah forced herself to think through the vertigo. The Meridians had taken human game concepts, chance, strategy, territory control, and made them real using technology they barely understood. Each rule they added created new quantum interactions, building towards a catastrophic collapse that could tear a hole in spacetime. But they wouldn't listen to warnings about danger. They were too entranced by the game itself. Then it hit her. "Keep playing," she told the technician, drawing surprised looks from both Val Zen and the Meridians. "But let me add one more rule from human games." She pulled out her father's old chess set, the one that had started everything. In chess, every piece has limitations. The queen is the most powerful piece, but even she can't move through other pieces. Limitations don't restrict the game, they define it. The Meridian technician's crystalline facets shifted in consideration. "You suggest we add restrictions to the quantum states?" "Exactly." Sarah set up the chess pieces, Look at how each piece's movement rules create strategy. Without limitations, there would be no game, just chaos. Understanding flickered through the Meridian's crystalline features. They turned to their control panel, fingers flying over holographic interfaces. The quantum fluctuations began to stabilize as they added new parameters, limitations based on chess movements that gave structure to the probability fields. Fascinating, the technician murmured. By restricting the quantum states to defined patterns, we actually increased the strategic possibilities while maintaining space-time coherence. Valzen's form pulsed with relieved colors as their readings stabilized. Quantum field containment at 97% and rising. The probability cascades are resolving themselves. Sarah watched as the Meridian's game transformed. What had been a chaotic mess of quantum possibilities became an elegant merger of human gaming concepts and advanced technology. The pieces still moved in strange ways, still manipulated probability in space, but now they did so within carefully defined limits that preserved the fabric of reality. "We'll need to register this with the Galactic Gaming Commission," she said, already drafting the paperwork in her mind. The first successful merger of human game theory and quantum mechanics. "What are you calling it?" The Meridian technician considered for a moment. Crystalline features refracting light in complex patterns. "We were thinking Quantum Kings. A tribute to your chess, but with our own developments." As Sarah watched the Meridians play their new creation, faces alight with the same joy she'd seen in humans playing simple board games, she realized something her father had missed. The galaxy didn't need to be forced to evolve through crisis. It just needed to be taught how to play. Her neural interface pinged with an alert from station security. The Valdaxians were requesting permission to study the new game for military applications. The Prel wanted to explore its implications for collective consciousness. The Aetheri were fascinated by its emotional resonance across quantum states. The game was spreading, but this time, it was bringing people together instead of tearing them apart. In the corner of the room, her father's old chess set sat quietly, its simple wooden pieces a reminder that sometimes the most revolutionary ideas start with the simplest of games. The Galactic Council chamber hummed with tension as representatives from 17 species debated the human game problem. Holographic displays showed statistics from the past month. Economic disruptions from modified Monopoly games, quantum fluctuations from the Meridian incident, and psychological impact reports from a dozen worlds. Sarah sat in the human delegation's pod, trying not to fidget as a Valdaxian general described the tactical implications of battleships spreading through their fleet. Her father's trial would begin tomorrow. But right now, she had to convince the council not to ban board games entirely. "The evidence is clear," announced High Counselor Zix, their crystalline form casting rainbow refractions across the chamber. "These games have caused more cultural upheaval in 1 month than we typically see in a decade." With respect, Sarah stood. Cultural exchange always causes. A commotion at the chamber's entrance interrupted her. Valzen burst in, their usually composed form flickering with urgent colors. "High Counselor," they chimed, "you need to see this." The security chief's agitation was enough to cause a recess. Sarah followed the growing crowd of curious delegates to the council's break room, where they found an extraordinary scene. Junior diplomats from 6 different species sat around a makeshift gaming table. Character sheets and dice were scattered across its surface, along with small figurines that appeared to be crafted from various cultural artifacts. A young Valdaxian was wearing what looked like a homemade wizard's hat over their neural interface. "What exactly are we witnessing?" The High Counselor's tone carried equal parts confusion and fascination. "Dungeons and Dragons," Sarah whispered, recognizing the character sheets. "But they've modified it." The young Valdaxian. Sarah recognized them as Lieutenant Caleth's protege. Looked up nervously. "We've been developing it during breaks." Each species contributed elements from their own mythology and cultural practices. "Show us," Sarah encouraged, seeing the confusion on the council members' faces. The group hesitantly resumed their game. The Valdaxian dungeon master described a scenario that blended Earth fantasy with alien concepts. A Prel character used their species' collective consciousness mechanics as a unique magic system. An Aetheri had developed emotional energy attacks based on their natural abilities. The Meridian player had created a warrior who used controlled quantum fluctuations as special moves. See here, the DM pointed to their modified rulebook. We've integrated the Aetheri's empathic resonance as a game mechanic, and the Prel helped us develop a new system for group actions that's actually more efficient than the original rules. Sarah watched the council members' reactions. The High Counselor's crystalline form had shifted to a shade she'd never seen before, something between wonder and revelation. "This is remarkable," murmured a Meridian Council member. "They've created a framework for cross-species cultural exchange that actually functions within defined parameters. More than that," Sarah added, seeing the bigger picture. "They've created a safe space to explore and understand each other's perspectives. Each player experiences the world through different cultural lenses, but they're working together to tell a shared story." The young diplomats showed how they'd mapped different species' natural abilities to game mechanics, created new scenarios that addressed real diplomatic challenges, and even developed custom dice that worked with various alien physiologies. "We've been using it as a diplomatic training tool," admitted the Aetheri player, their crystalline shell glowing with slight embarrassment. "Running scenarios helps us understand how different species might approach various situations." The High Counselor turned to Sarah. "Ambassador Chen, would you say this is the intended purpose of these human games?" Sarah thought about her father, about his belief that games could force cultural evolution. He'd seen them as tools for change, but had missed their most important aspect. "Games like this create a space where we can be different together," she explained, "where we can explore new perspectives safely, learn from each other's strengths, and build something greater than any one culture could create alone." She gestured to the young diplomats, still sitting around their game table. "Look at them. 6 species that barely understood each other a month ago, now creating shared stories and solving problems together. They're not just playing a game, they're building bridges." The council chamber, when they reconvened, felt different. The debate had shifted from whether to ban games to how best to regulate and encourage their development. The young diplomats were invited to present their modifications to the council, leading to a fascinating discussion about using role-playing games in diplomatic training. As Sarah watched the council members engage with the concept of cooperative storytelling, she received a message on her neural interface. It was from her father, waiting in his detention cell. "Saw the council feed," it read. "You were right. The best games aren't about winning or losing. They're about bringing players together. Good move, little queen." Sarah smiled, pocketing her interface. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, she watched as the High Counselor tentatively rolled a 20-sided die, their crystalline form glowing with childlike delight as they learned to tell a new kind of story. 5 years after Sarah Chen first placed a chess set on her embassy desk, Nexus 7 had become unrecognizable. The station's central hub, once a sterile showcase of technological advancement, now hosted the largest multi-dimensional chess set in known space. Its pieces, each the size of a small shuttle, required players from different species to cooperate due to their unique abilities. Aetheri manipulating energy-based pieces, Valdaxians calculating quantum trajectories, and Prel coordinating complex movements through their collective consciousness. Sarah stood at the observation deck, watching a mixed-species team compete in the quarterly championship. Her father, recently released from rehabilitation, stood beside her, his diplomatic credentials restored but limited to cultural advisory roles. "They've modified the rules again," Marcus noted, watching an Aetheri and Valdaxian coordinate a complex castle maneuver through 4 dimensions. That move wouldn't have been possible under traditional chess rules. "That's the point, Dad. The best games evolve with their players." Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent message from Val Zen. The security chief's crystalline form pulsed with alert colors as they materialized nearby. "Ambassador, We have a situation in the commercial district. Someone is attempting to implement an unauthorized game modification. Sarah's heart sank. Even after 5 years, there were still those who tried to use games to manipulate or destabilize. "Your old prodigy?" she asked her father. Marcus shook his head. Xavier always lacked imagination. This seems different. The commercial district had transformed into a sprawling game bazaar. Shops specialized in everything from traditional Earthboard games to hybrid creations that merged multiple species gaming traditions. But today, a crowd had gathered around a familiar sight, a Monopoly board. "Really?" Sarah sighed. After the economic crisis 5 years ago. But as they got closer, she realized this was different. The crowd wasn't agitated. They were fascinated. The board had been modified, yes, but not to manipulate markets. Instead, it incorporated elements from 17 different species' economic systems. "It's brilliant," explained a young Meridian economist, their crystalline facets bright with excitement. "The game teaches cooperative market development. Players have to balance their species' economic principles with others, finding ways to create prosperity that works for everyone." The game's creator stood nearby, a familiar face that made both Sarah and Marcus stop short. Xavier Chen, Marcus's former protege, the one who had tried to weaponize games during the original crisis. "Before you call security," Xavier said quickly, noting Val Zen's warning colors, "look at the certification." He held up an official Gaming Commission approval document. "I did it properly this time. All modifications tested and approved. No hidden agendas. No market manipulation protocols." Sarah studied the game board carefully. The rules were complex but elegant, creating a system where players couldn't succeed through pure competition or pure cooperation. They had to find balance, just as the real galactic economy did. "You've changed," she observed. Xavier nodded. "I had a lot of time to think during my rehabilitation. You were right. Games shouldn't be weapons. They should be bridges." A commotion from the central hub interrupted them. The championship match had ended in an unprecedented way. A 17-player simultaneous checkmate across multiple dimensions. The station erupted in celebrations as species that once barely understood each other celebrated their shared achievement. "Speaking of bridges," Marcus said softly, "I believe I owe the station a debt." He pulled out a small box Sarah recognized, the chess set that had started everything. Perhaps it's time this found a permanent home. Hours later, the ancient chess set sat in a place of honor in the station's newly established Game History Museum. Behind it, displays showed how that simple set of carved pieces had sparked a cultural revolution that transformed galactic society. Sarah stood with her father and Xavier, watching as new visitors discovered the exhibit. A young Valdaxian was explaining chess to an Aetheri child, their neural interface translating the game's concepts into emotional resonances the child could understand. Nearby, a Prel collective was teaching a group of Meridian cadets their latest modification to Go, which used quantum probability fields to represent territory control. "You know what the best part is?" Sarah mused, watching the diverse crowd. "None of them are playing exactly the same games we brought. They've made them their own, created new traditions, new ways of playing. The games evolved, just like we did." Her neural interface pinged with a priority alert. The Galactic Council was requesting her presence, something about a proposal to make game design a mandatory part of diplomatic training. As she headed for the council chamber, she passed more signs of how games had changed the station. Meditation rooms converted to game lounges, diplomatic offices with built-in gaming tables, even maintenance crews using cooperative game principles to coordinate complex repairs. 5 years ago, she had defended a simple chess set from confiscation. Today, she watched as a new generation of diplomats learned to understand each other not through formal protocols or advanced technology, but through the simple act of sitting down together and learning to play. Some said that humans had given the galaxy games. Sarah knew better. They had given the galaxy something far more important: the ability to make their own games, tell their own stories, and find their own ways to play together. In the end, that was the greatest game of all.